Welcome guys to your video lecture. Today we're going to be discussing viruses and bacteria. You're going to be on this note page today. So this is your note page, but as always we start with our vocab. Our two vocab words today are virus and bacteria, so let's get those started. Here's your vocabulary. Pause the video so that you can copy them down. If you need to shorten this, as long as it still says the correct information, you get the general idea, you can. Some things that are really important are that viruses are not living, they need a host cell, and it's a tiny infectious particle that you find inside living organisms. Bacteria, we want to make sure they're microscopic organisms living. They're usually one-celled, and they can be found everywhere. They can be dangerous, but they can also be very helpful. So there's our vocab. Go ahead and pause it so that you can copy this down. Now we're going to be switching back over to our note page. Just a reminder, it looks like this. We're going to be talking about bacteria and viruses. Let's get started. Okay. So we're starting our lecture on the vectors of diseases, or the ways that diseases are transferred from one to another. We're starting off with bacteria and viruses. We're also going to be talking about fungi, parasites, and protozoan. In the coming days, we're starting with the easiest, bacteria and viruses. So if you will turn to your bacteria notes. For these, you're going to underline whatever, or you're going to write down whatever is underlined in your notes. So bacteria are tiny life forms that are made up of only one cell. They are single-celled. We call them protists. If you would like, you're welcome to try and copy the pictures that they have. Specifically, I'd like you to copy these different shapes. This, and this. Bacteria come in different shapes and sizes. You need a microscope to see them. A regular light microscope would work on the highest of the magnifications, but you can also use an electron microscope, but it's not needed. They're very small. They come in different sizes and shapes. We have rod shapes, which we call bacilli, or something along those lines. Some rod-shaped bacteria that you might know of are called E. coli. That is what causes the stomach flu when you eat raw eggs, or not raw eggs. E. coli can be found on lettuce often. It causes severe diarrhea and an upset stomach, so it has some gastrointestinal issues. Others are circular shaped, or cocci. One example is the bacteria that causes a UTI, a urinary tract infection, is shaped small and circular and round. Some bacteria also have small tails called flagellum that allow them to move about. So one of the classifications that we have of life is that living things move, they reproduce, and they consume and respond to stimuli. So that's what you need to be a living thing. Bacteria are in fact living. They can reproduce on their own, they can move on their own, and they also consume. If you need to, pause me. If not, we're moving on because we only have 15 minutes to be able to record. You might not know this, but you have tons of bacteria inside of your body right now at this very moment, both inside and actually outside on your skin. So according to scientists, there are 10 times more bacteria cells than human cells in or on our bodies. They help us break down our food in our gut. So actually I can't remember this guy, but he gave a guest lecture at UNCW once, and he studied the microorganisms on and in your body, and it's actually a whole ecosystem. So there's a whole almost world of organisms on and inside of you. Well, if you study a little bit more, and maybe we'll watch the video, our gut bacteria, they're actually programmed to think about the food, or to kind of send signals to your brain about certain foods. So you have bacteria in your gut that like to break down healthy food, and then you have bacteria in your gut that also like to break down unhealthy food. And so if you are eating a lot of unhealthy food, you're really feeding those bacteria that are purpose to help you break down that unhealthy food, and therefore they're reproducing more and sending more signals to your brain saying, hey, we want this unhealthy food, because that's what they like. And then your healthy food bacteria are actually deteriorating or becoming less. You're not feeding them as much, so they're becoming less prevalent. And that's why it's hard and you get these cravings, as well as other things as far as nutrients go. But that can also lead to cravings that you have, right? In the same sense, if you're feeding your healthy gut bacteria healthy food, and you're feeding them so they're reproducing more and sending more signals to your brain saying, hey, we want healthy food, and your unhealthy food bacteria are becoming less prevalent, and therefore you're craving unhealthy food less. It's really cool. We can talk about it more if you'd like, but just a little bit of the science inside of you. We use bacteria as well, so bacteria can be both harmful and useful. In the case of milk, yogurt and some medicines. So they're used to help produce these medicines like antibiotics, and food like yogurt, right? We have to curdle the milk, and that's done with bacteria. They're decomposers. That's their primary purpose, which means that they break down dead plants and animals, primarily animal products, animal cells and animal byproducts. So in that process of breaking them down, they create the things that we need, right? So they might create the medicine that we need, or they might create the process that creates yogurt. Some bacteria, as we know, can be harmful. They cause diseases, like strep throat is derived from bacteria, food poisoning is derived from bacteria, and pneumonia is derived from bacteria. So we can get infected with these harmful bacteria, and they'll actually trigger an immune system response, and we'll get sick. Bacteria are also awesome because they can live in different and extreme habitats. So they're found everywhere, even in the most extreme habitats. Some species can survive freezing temperatures. Others can survive very hot temperatures. They're found in soil, on your skin, in hot underwater volcanoes. They're very versatile, which means that they can survive very many places. Bacteria are also vital for life on Earth, as they can take nitrogen from the air and fix it so that plants can use it. So if we didn't have the bacteria that do that in our soil, then we wouldn't have the nitrogen our soil needs for our plants to grow. So it's an essential part of all proteins as well. And there are bacteria right now that are in underwater vents. I can't remember exactly the temperature, but I think it's somewhere over about 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And these bacteria are the only thing that can live around this vent, because they are withstanding this extreme heat, right? So they're very, very tolerant and versatile, because they can be found everywhere. We're going to switch our gears to viruses, just as cool as bacteria, but maybe a little bit cooler, depending on what you think. Viruses are even smaller than bacteria. They're roughly about 1/100th of the size of the bacterium. You can't see them with an ordinary light microscope. We wouldn't be able to see them. You need an electron microscope to see them, which is a much more powerful microscope. They're actually so small that the measles virus is about 8 times smaller than our E. coli bacteria that we were talking about. The hepatitis virus is about 40 times smaller. And then to even put it in more of a perspective, the virus that causes polio is about 10 times smaller than 1 grain of salt. So if you can visualize in your head, we're talking about organisms that are so, so tiny. So one of the questions that we have with viruses are they alive? So it's kind of a hard question. One of the definitions of life that we talked about a second ago was that it can reproduce. You have to be able to reproduce to be alive. Viruses do reproduce, but they require a host cell to be able to do that. So they can only reproduce when they infect another cell. All viruses are parasites. We're going to talk more in depth about parasites in a later lecture, but parasites are something that is utilizing another organism to benefit themselves, and they're often not, the organism that is the host is either not benefiting at all, or they're harmful to it, so it's taking a toll on the organism. But they do exhibit other characteristics of life, like they can evolve and they have genes, and they've been described as being on the edge of life. They move, right? Which is one of our requirements of being alive. And they have DNA, they have genetic material, but because they can't reproduce on their own, it's kind of, we're not sure if you would classify it as life. the structure of a virus. So viruses can be different shapes. One of them looks like a spaceship, this one right here. Viruses have to infect a cell in order to reproduce. We talked about it. They inject their genetic material into the cell where it takes over and controls the cell. It forces the cell to make thousands of copies of the virus. The cell then bursts, allowing the virus to infect more cells and just further the process, right? So this orange one right here is kind of what we see when we look at the COVID pictures, the electron scans of the coronavirus. So if you would think of maybe like a shot going into your skin, like if you were the cell and the virus was the shot is basically the genetic material being put into the cell from the virus. And then it hijacks the DNA and the protein building process of the cell so that it can make more viruses of itself. So it eventually will kill the host cell and create more viruses, right? If a cell bursts, there's no going back, it's dead now. And all those viruses that were inside and contained are now out into the body and going to do the exact same process again and again. So viruses cause many diseases. This includes the flu, the common cold, chickenpox, HIV. Now we know the coronavirus, right? And viruses are so difficult to kind of treat because we have vaccines for them, but we don't have an antibiotic. So if you have a virus issue and a doctor tries to prescribe you an antibiotic, it's not going to work because an antibiotic is medicine that's going to treat for bacterial issues, right? Bacteria-caused sicknesses, not viral. So you can't go to the doctor and get an antibiotics for the common cold. It's just not going to work because it's caused by a virus. That's why we're having such issues treating the coronavirus as well, because you can't just treat it with an antibiotic. You need to come up with a vaccine so that people can get the antibodies and then go on with life like the chickenpox. Actually, there's a good story about, and I'll put the next slide on, about viruses and vaccines. So vaccines were created by Edward Jenner, this nice little fellow right there. He discovered the first vaccine. He noticed that milkmaids who got cowpox didn't get the more deadly smallpox. He guessed that whatever was in the blisters that they got from cowpox made them immune to smallpox. He tested his hypothesis on a small boy, which now we know is not ethical. In 1796, he inoculated or gave the boy a shot with cowpox, and 2 months later with smallpox. The boy didn't develop the disease of smallpox, and Jenner concluded that the cowpox gave him immunity, and he continued to test this hypothesis on other children, including his own son of 11 months old. The Latin name for cowpox is vaccina, which is where we get the word vaccine from. So if you'll copy that down. Vaccines are actually when we inject people with, and we'll talk more about vaccines as well, we inject people with a weakened or dead form of the virus, and then their body has that normal immune system response to it, which is creating fighter systems, right? So our white blood cells, and then we have our memory cells as well that come out, and they create antibodies to fight this virus. And then once they have created them, they kind of hang around in your memory cells in your bloodstream. So if that virus does ever come back, you're ready for it, right? That's why you can't get chickenpox more than once if you've already had it. And same with some of the other flus, right? Or other virus-caused illnesses. Because you've already got that immune system response, and your immune system is better able to fight off a dead or weakened virus than it would be the full-fledged real virus. So when it does come and hits you, you're more likely to fight it off. Doesn't always work, right? Sometimes the vaccines make us sick, as in like it infects us and we get a little down, or not down, we get a little bit of the symptoms as well. And then lastly, my fun fact about viruses is that they actually came around and were a little bit more discovered because of the tobacco industry. There was a virus that was causing issues with the leaves. And through an experiment, they found that it was actually viral cause. They sifted the juices, they crunched up a leaf, put it in another leaf, and that leaf ended up dying. Then later they strained the leaf and took out all the bacteria, and it still caused a sickness. So they concluded that it was indeed a virus that caused it. Have a great day, guys. This is the end of your lecture. Goodbye.